Welcome back to Muse Capital's new podcast series on the future of how we care. We're thrilled to have Dawn Scott with us today, who has dedicated her career to strengthening the link between women's health and performance. Dawn is a pioneering sports scientist whose career includes roles with the US and England women's national teams, FIFA, UEFA, and MLS. Her expertise has been key to 2 FIFA Women's World Cup victories and an Olympic gold medal with the US women's national team. She holds a master's degree in sports science nutrition from the University of Aberdeen. Currently, she serves as the Director of Performance, Medical and Innovation for the Washington Spirit. When we initially invested in Washington Spirit, we helped Michelle Kang transition to majority ownership in what the Sports Business Journal hailed as the deal of the year in 2023. Since then, Michelle's visionary leadership has paved the way for ambitious growth plans in the NWSL and across the globe. It has been a pleasure to get to know Dawn as soon as she joined the team and to discuss our shared passion for women's sports and women's health. Her visionary approach continues to inspire us, making her achievements and dedication to female athletes truly remarkable. I'm thrilled to have Dawn share her insights and stories with us today. Thank you, Dawn, for joining us today. I cannot tell you how excited I am and have been leading up to this podcast. I've been bugging you and stalking you on emails and texts trying to get this in the books. I know you're super duper busy traveling around the world, specifically from DC with Washington Spirit and in Europe with the Lionesses and Olympique Lyonnais. And so thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today.
No problem. Thank you for the invite, and it's obviously great to get an opportunity to speak to you. So yeah, looking forward to it. Excited to see where we go today.
And usually on this podcast, we have my co-founder, Rachel, but she has 2 kids and we are knee-deep in so much work at the moment. And I thought, you know what? You can stay home. I'm going to hijack this podcast and make it one-on-one with my favorite Dawn. And of course, Uzo, the cat, needs to be here as well. So listen, I would love to kick things off. Talk about how you got to Washington Spirit. Let's jump into that.
Yeah, of course. Middle of 2022, I was approached by Mark Krikorin, who'd come into Washington Spirit as sporting director, and Michelle Kang, who's obviously the owner here, that they wanted to bring somebody in to oversee the performance and medical and innovation department here at Washington Spirit. So I guess was very bold to Michelle and presented what I seen as like a plan of how we should support female athletes. And her exact words were, I love it, let's do it. Like, when can you start? And let's get going, and moved to DC to start supporting the Washington Spirit. So yeah, and I guess that's where I am right now.
When Muse Sport and myself invested in Washington Spirit in 2020, this was when Steve Baldwin was the owner. And I remember going to DC and watching the team and looking at the performance center, or lack thereof. And my mind was blown of just how little there was in place around health and wellness and period tracking, and how women need to be handled and managed differently than men. And by then, I had become quite knowledgeable about it because, of course, at Muse Capital, we invest in these areas. It was also something that made me realize that there was a big opportunity and a room for growth. So as a businesswoman, I knew that we could only go up from there. And then when Michelle took over the team and I joined the board, it was inevitable. And it was so wonderful for me to see Michelle from day one obsessed with this concept of training women as women and really building out the first ever protocol to be able to lead in this area. And then, of course, she acquired the Lions in the UK and Olympique Lyonnais in France. And those 3 teams with Washington Spirit, the amount of data that you're collecting through your athletes, I can only imagine how much more robust your platform is becoming. So what is it that Michelle and you are looking to build out, and how far along are you in that journey?
I feel like there's a few different angles. I think one is like that exact focus of what you said of training women as women and almost changing the narrative of how we support female athletes. So that involves that education piece around female physiology, female hormones. And part of that is, across all of the clubs, almost having a female health strategy of how do we educate the players, how do we track and monitor? How do we then support that individual player back with any individual symptoms they have or any specifics that relate to them and their cycle and their impact on recovery, sleep, health, performance? So I think they're the key things. I think in terms of the innovation at Washington Spirit alone, we've got 3 PhD students embedded within the club. They're now delving into specific research questions specific to our players. The other piece is making some of this education globally accessible. Last week alone, we had 40 or 50 youth coaches come in and observe training. And another part of what we want to do here is do some of that research and innovation. Currently, 6% of the sports science research is on female athletes. So if we continue at this same rate, it would take 108 years to close that gender research gap. So we also want to partner with different institutions, university institutions globally, so that we can do that research with validated methods, appropriate methods, take into account obviously the female athlete, the female hormonal cycle. We want to do it with bigger data sets because 6% of the research is done with non-validated methods or small data sets, because to factor in females can also cost more money if you want to take into account hormonal changes throughout the cycle. So we want to accelerate and close that gap quicker than 108 years. And part of the reason girls drop out of sport at a much faster rate than boys is because they're trained as boys. So how can we make that education available to girls or to parents or to coaches or to staff who support those girls at the younger ages, so that we can try to slow down or reduce that big dropout of girls? Because females need to be educated so that they can be empowered to understand their own bodies and then to implement strategies to try and reduce any impact or severity on their performance, whether it's performance as an athlete or performance in the workplace.
That's exactly right. I mean, what's so valuable about the work that you're doing is that it's not just for female athletes and for professional athletes. It's actually mostly going to reveal so much and educate about the women's body to women everywhere. Originally, this podcast series was supposed to be called All Women Are Athletes. And the idea that we are all athletes in the sense that we have a lot on our plate, whether you're a mother or you're a board member or a professional athlete. And in order for us to perform at our highest level, we need to understand how to keep our body in the best shape possible. And it's not just shape as in going to yoga in the morning and having a hot bod. It's actually what's happening inside and all areas of our body. And what's shocking to me is that the women's cycle is at the core of this. Some areas of your cycle, you need to make certain food adjustments, and other areas of your cycle require other types of nutrients. And one phase, you are less likely to be injured. Another phase, you're more likely to be injured for physical activity. One phase of your cycle, you can get away with a little bit less sleep. Another phase in your cycle, you need extra sleep and extra attention. Is there a way to summarize for listeners out there how the cycle works and the general trends around those 4 phases and performance?
Obviously, the menstrual cycle is based on hormonal fluctuations. Phase 1, you have that bleed phase where it can last typically from 2 to 7 days. Mid-cycle or ovulation is your follicular phase. And then post-ovulation then is that luteal phase, which is, post-ovulation until the onset of that next bleed phase. What we typically see is the temperature deviation during that second phase, second half of their cycle, so the luteal phase. And then you see the temperature deviation drop just before the onset of the next cycle. So in terms of post-ovulation and the 4 to 5 days before the onset of your next bleed phase tends to be when we see most players report the most symptoms. We do see some players mid-cycle report changes in hand-eye coordination or reaction time. We've even had coaches highlight that they've seen a change in, whether it's a goalkeeper and some of their reaction work there, or an outfield player and a little bit of their coordination. And the 4 to 5 days before the onset of the next cycle is when we tend to see greatest impact on sleep disturbances, reduced recovery, more fatigue, more muscle soreness. Some players have bloating during that time, emotional changes.
Why is that?
I think just the fluctuating hormones and the impact on the body, water retention, the sleep disruption potentially linked into the increase in temperature.
It's such a complex system that you're building out because you have so many athletes. Everyone is at a different moment in their cycle. And it is really all about tracking. I mean, we've talked about this in the past, but Muse invested in a company called Ellie Health, which it is the first ever continuous monitoring saliva tracker. And for the first time ever, we'll be able to have at a moment's notice a sense of where your cortisol levels are, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. And when I think back personally, if I had had those metrics from the day of my first period when I was 16, all the way up to now, age 43, first of all, I'd be able to know how deep into perimenopause that I am right now, but I'd be able to tell what fluctuations every month are normal, which are not, which ones are affected by specific food that I may have eaten at a moment in time or physical activity. And it's really hard for you to get this level of granular detail within your athletes until there's enough data out there and technology and innovation out there. So, what kind of innovation do you think is still missing today that you would like to see that would make your life easier, that would make your athletes' lives and performance better?
If we think about female athletes alone, for me, you just said it there, like there's so much there that we're tracking and monitoring. And we're lucky that in our performance medical and innovation department, we've got 17 full time staff, and that is a combination of medical staff, strength and conditioning specialists, sports science, physical performance, a female health lead, a performance dietitian, a mental health coach. We've got referral pathway for more clinical psychology support. And then we got 3 PhD students kind of embedded in the department. And by having all of those elements of support, we can almost support the player 360. So I think it's like the balance of the technology and the data, and also what are you doing with the data. We are very intentional as a group here in that whatever we measure has a purpose, and there's some feedback and intervention for the player, the athlete, whether that is in their movement preparation program, whether that is in their injury prevention, whether that's in their gym-based conditioning, whether that is in their nutrition strategy. So as much as there might be those technology needs, having the right number of staff and the right resource around athletes is really key. Specifically, the education, making the education accurate, having platforms where they might be shared and where that information can be accessible. If we can educate girls younger, then they're going to have that information younger. And, you know, for me, my big wish is that some of that education and knowledge about their own bodies would help to slow down that dropout of sport at the younger ages and empower girls to own their own physiology and use it as their superpower and actually turn that around. So Georgia Broomvels talks about being the CEO of your own body, like understand your own body to the T, that you actually know what works for you and what you should be doing when, so that you can use that as your superpower to be the best kind of version of yourself and optimize your own athletic potential. And then I think the other side of that is the research. Christine Yu wrote a book, I think it's called Up to Speed, last year. And within that, you know, she spoke about majority of the training guidelines that we use with our female players is based on research on the white 70 kilogram reference male. And that is so true. And that's where we need to change that narrative. So we need to develop a research agenda and start doing that research of even some of the basics to understand the cycle, to then apply some of that research to the research methods to then understand how we should train players, recover them, like sleep cycles, etc., and then start supporting that individual player.
It never stops to shock me that we are in 2024 and someone at your level is still in the process of we're trying to figure out these basic trends, and that we haven't been able to have that till this point. And in terms of self education, I also started only at age 36 when I got breast cancer. That's the only time I ever started to look under the hood of my own body to try to make sense of why. And then you end up taking your own health under your own hands and you start experimenting, you start Googling what hormones are and how they affect you, and trying to piecemeal all this information to try to make sense of why you feel a certain way. And just a side note, I always tell some of my friends, now that I know how the cycle works, Yes, the week before your period, it's a more delicate time, and you have to be more delicate with your body. And it's not a weakness. That's just you have to know how to sort of be aware of that and change your lifestyle. But then on the flip side, there's the week of our ovulation, which I think a nickname of it is Venus week, when you're on fire and you feel like the world is at your fingertips and everything works. But also, you mentioned mental health. Sometimes people think that they're having a mental health issue when really it's just a moment in their cycle that they haven't quite understood. And then that will pass. And there's just so much there. As a woman, learning what you're learning today, what kind of advice have you given yourself as you've learned more about the woman's body? What kind of things are you implementing from a diet, mental health tracking perspective? What's something that you do, Dawn, that you think are sort of top 3, 4 things that we should be paying attention to or looking more deeply in?
Yeah, I think the first one is tracking across the whole menstrual cycle, status, monitoring symptoms, activity, wellness, how are you feeling in terms of self report, logging injury, illness. Those first 5 are more your subjective kind of markers, feelers. Add in some kind of objective marker. So whether that is a wearable like Aura or Whoop or Evie or something kind of similar, where you can now track your rest and heart rate, your sleep metrics, your HRV, your skin temperature or your temperature deviation. If you can now overlay that with some of that self-report, and then potentially if you can do, some kind of hormone analysis, even for 1 or 2 months to try and confirm or otherwise. So as a female, you can then start seeing some of those correlations and combine data sets to determine yourself, like where you're at, how you feel, and what you should be doing today. So I think 1 is that. I think 2 is a wearable, because I think, can you then correlate how you subjectively feel with maybe how you are objectively? The aim is track, monitor, potentially wearable, and then implement some kind of strategy that might help to reduce any symptom or anything that you might be feeling. Like, they would kind of be my top tips, and learn more about yourself, to empower yourself to know where you are in your cycle, what symptoms you might have, when your best kind of phases are, when you might struggle and you might need to just pull back and be kind to yourself, as opposed to when you can push yourself. And I think that's like kind of what we do with athletes every day, is we recognize something, whether it's through a test or whether it's through a verbal visual interaction with a player, we action it, and then we implement something to try and improve or reduce it. And I'd say that's probably the same in everyday life as much as for an athlete.
It's incredible what you do. At Muse, all of our employees and partners, we track our own cycle, and we are so used to telling each other and keeping each other up to date on where we are, because, if you have a week-long conference or a massive crunch time deadline that we have, and one of us is in a certain phase and another one is another, we're aware of each other's cycle, and we know where to best put each other into that team dynamic, right? So it's also important in terms of business teams, of understanding sort of where we are and how we can support each other.
And just that normalizing the conversation, that it's something that you feel comfortable talking about. I remember back in 2019, when we started that education with the players, and then we were at the World Cup, and I just remember one picture that Alex Morgan took with, I think it was Mal Pugh and Ali Long, and they held up 4 fingers, and they were all in phase 4 of their cycle, which is that window just before the next bleed phase. And they became comfortable speaking about it, and we would have graphics up by the elevator, the lift, as players would go to the meal room, just saying, if you're in this phase, focus on these foods, kind of thing. And, a player would stand there reading it, read the graphic, you're then going down to mealtime, and you know what phase you're in. So you then kind of zone in and grab those foods that's specific for you. And
I need that in my life. I wish that we all had that. I also want to wake up in the morning and have the mirror of my bathroom tell me, this is the phase you're in. For breakfast, you should have this. For lunch, you should have that. And to be honest, I wish I was a fly on the wall on your education sessions with your athletes, because I would love to get some practical tips as well on what should we be eating and how to augment our health with different lifestyle changes throughout the day. In terms of what we can do as individuals, there's the trackers like Whoop and hormone testing, as you said, and an activity tracker and nutrition tracker. What we don't have is one single app that combines all those things together because we are such sophisticated human beings. And then, as you said, it's not just the data, it's then what you can infer from that data and what you can learn and the insights from that data. And bringing that to the everyday person, not just the athlete, is key. But we wouldn't be able to get
agree.
all women this information if it wasn't for what you're doing at Washington Spirit and with the other teams, because, and I wrote an article on Sports Business Journal about this, that the rise of women's sports is really in parallel of the rise of research and innovation in women's health, which is only really happening now. It's only been the last 7 years really that we're starting to see a major bump. So what's happening in women's sports and what you're doing and what Michelle is doing, you are leading this way, not just for women on the field, but for women everywhere. I honestly can't thank you enough for the work that you do, for the career up until now. I'm grateful for Michelle to be investing constantly into this because we need capital to be able to develop these platforms, and female-led capital specifically who knows how important this is. It's just an exciting time, and it's about time that we got here today.
Thank you so much for your kind words. And I think, like you say, it's been a long time coming. It's sort of long overdue, but I think it's also exciting time now ahead of. I just think Michelle's vision and her commitment is, for me, unmatched in female sport, and I've never seen this kind of support. And I just think it's really exciting how she is driving this and her vision, and really excited as, the next few months and the next few years working with her to build out and make some of this accessible.
I don't know if you know, but in September, Muse Sport invested in Sail GP, which is the Grand Prix of sailing, sort of Formula One of sailing. Larry Ellison started the league 4 years ago. And I didn't know much about it until it entered my desk in September. And then it kind of has blown me away since then. And one of the things that I love the most about sailing is that it's one of the only sports where men and women perform on the same team. And interestingly, as I'm spending more time with the team and the league, of course, the first thing I do is harp on and on and on and on and on about when are we doing a women's performance center. But in this instance, the performance center is going to be really men and women performing together. And that to me is going to be fascinating to kind of see how the medical group and the performance team can manage both men and women at the same time. But any advice from me as we're building out that and trying to get women and men on the same team?
I think it's just that individual lens, but in a different way, and tracking them across time to understand their own, how do they respond to the training? How do they rate the training in terms of intensity? How does that kind of vary against the males? What are the demands of the role, the position on the team? What training does the individual need for that? How do you train the individual regardless of male, female, for them to become the best version of that kind of role on the team? I think will be the key thing.
I love it. I will keep you posted and let you know how it goes.
Yeah, I'll follow it. I'll follow along.
Amazing. I mean, essentially, there is no all sizes fit one, and the moral of the story here is take your own health in your own hands, track your hormone schedule, track your nutrition, track your sleep, track all the metrics that you can, take advantage of any innovation that is out there today, like wearables and apps, and start to educate yourself of how your own body is working. Start to make inferences of sort of trends and patterns that you're seeing. Go to your doctor to share some of this data. Hopefully, what you're building, Dawn, is going to be available to women everywhere, not just to athletes. And I'm looking forward to seeing you build this out. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on today. And yeah, really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to check out our show notes, and to find out more about Dawn and the Washington Spirit, go to washingtonspirit.com. As always, you can find more about us at musecapital.vc. We will be on a summer break through August and can't wait to bring you our next episode in September. Until then, we hope you stay healthy and continue to champion women's health in your daily lives and beyond. Special thanks to our executive producer, Lauren Maddock, and our composer and engineer, John Meek. Ciao for now.